Hello everyone, my name is Steven with a V and welcome to Storytime. Today we're going to be reading some malicious compliance stories, tales where following the rules lead to some just desserts. And of course, just let me say, if you're not already subscribed to Storytime, please consider doing so. But with that being said, let's sit back, relax, and listen to some captivating Reddit stories. Lose your school ID and get 5 special detentions. This was 10 years ago during my freshman year of high school. Midway through the year, our school tightened up a policy on IDs. You now needed an ID to enter and exit the school during the day. We were allowed out during lunch or free periods. Before, if you needed a new ID, you just bought one for $25 and that was the end of it. Now, they changed the policy so that you would get 5 special detentions if you lose an ID anytime after the start of the day. Special detentions, unlike regular detentions, had to be served immediately and consecutively. You could serve regular detentions whenever you wanted as long as you had none by the end of the school year, especially for the kids that had time-dependent responsibilities like looking after their siblings after school. Getting special detentions was a non-option for most people. You could also get a special detention for stuff that wasn't stupid, like bullying or theft. But losing an ID or getting it stolen was almost never the offender's fault, and they still had to deal with it. You also got 1 detention for each class missed, but that was pretty much the only way to get a regular detention. It was strictly enforced. No more, no less. Now, most of the students immediately realized that if they lost their ID while they were outside, lunch started at 4th period and there were 9 periods, there's no reason to go back to school because they'll get in more trouble. I lost my ID once and just left school and headed home. But another day, my friend had his wallet stolen while he was outside and he had nothing to do, so he just spent the day in the courtyard, made sure to knock on and wave in the windows of a class he was forced to miss, and emailed the teacher from his phone to tell her what had happened. The teacher was completely understanding and didn't punish him further for that. I don't know the full extent of these things happening, but the school quietly changed the policy over a year later. That's such a terrible policy. Like, if you genuinely get robbed, you're done for. You get 5 special detentions that you have to serve consecutively immediately. It's literally better to give up, go home, and just accept whatever hit to your academics that receives you than try and do the responsible thing and stay at school. It's absolutely no surprise to me that this got changed over a year later. So, you, whom is not my manager, have emailed me telling me that I don't have enough detail in my daily reports. I comply. So I rock up to work this morning. It's 5:20 to 6 and I'm there well before my manager or other colleagues. So I dust off my laptop and peruse my work emails for the day. I see a snitty piece from a manager, million-mile-an-hour Mick, whom isn't my direct line manager, telling me and others that we don't add enough detail into our day's reports. So, in the spirit of things, I open up my laptop and therein begins my compliance. I start the day by detailing the task briefs, the various permits, the safe systems of work, every piece of paperwork that I have to go through. And there are probably about 30 pages of paper to be read and filled in. I detail it all. Then there's the phone call to the control officer to let me gain access for the day and my brief to him explaining what I'm meant to be doing for the day. That gets noted down too. And then my manager turns up. Now, he's not the easiest guy to work with, but he's okay. While he doesn't give me the autonomy that I'm used to, previously the arrangement was if you don't hear from me, the job is completed, and likes to look over my shoulder a lot. He's not too unbearable and will stick in my court when it comes to health and safety calls. He does accept my daily reports being 1 or 2 brief sentences, something that will let him clear off his tracker, and mark my work as complete. Well, millions had raised my peak and so I will comply. So now we detail out everything, from exact number of cable ties used to every time we perform minor housekeeping. From simple decisions to grand size selection, I have noted it down, explaining in great detail everything I can while we work. Well, I'm not done yet. Now it comes to testing. And our test procedure is laborious compared to most Sparks test specifications. Now I write down how we test cables, down to the core. And when some of your cables are huge multi-cores, and then detailing writing up the spreadsheet, explaining what is going on there too. You name it, if I've done it, it's been written down. It is certainly wasting my time, but I will comply, and I will comply tomorrow too, and the day after. And at the end, I wrote a little note stating that my day's work could have been completed with 2 small simple sentences. 1. Installed new cable X12345 and had minor issue XU123456. And 2. Successfully tested X12345. I followed it up with the fact that those 2 simple sentences cleared several managers' task lists, leaving me time to focus on my work instead of wasting time writing diaries, and that wasting everyone's time is a really unproductive way of dealing business. But if they're going to persist with this nonsense, I will need additional time instead of less time than they scheduled me for my tasks. I let a colleague know, and he's told me he can't even cope with reading it. It's too long and he bursts into tears every time he tries to read it out. I will wait for tomorrow gleefully. So, the consequence of it was thus. I ended up at the same site as the other manager today and confronted him over his silly bollocks. And I expressed in no uncertain terms that his email was pointless. He admitted that he was getting pressure from on high and that he thinks I should do what I always did because I'm in a fairly niche role where my simple statements expressing my completion were appropriate, and offered to write my site diary for today by including me in his. My direct manager only called me 17 times today, which actually seems less for some reason, and the general construction manager was polite to me and didn't give me as hard a time as he usually tries to. And my general no concern given in terms of I know I can walk into other work easily made today a good day. The other manager also let me know that none of the high-end management actually read the diaries, they're just making noise. But the end-paying clients are, so keeping it sensible over my producing an opus of an evening for my chuckles will keep me in their good graces, because I have a reasonably good reputation with them. My peers who have read it have agreed with me openly because our work is standardized, and install XXXX cable pretty much is self-explanatory. In short, go back to what worked before. Oh boy, now that's a real level of petty right there. I'm vibing with OP on this one because when work can be standardized into something short, sweet, and to the point, I'm always going to be the one that wants to go towards that route. So when somebody says, oh, this needs to be detailed, this needs to be labeled, oh man, it's just so frustrating. Okay, I'll do every single thing and write it all out and you can read all of it. You can check over all of it. It's not quite the same thing because I understand why teachers did this, but it kind of gives me the same vibes as when you were doing schooling and they said show your work, even though it was obviously some kind of question that you could easily do in your head. How to cut onions like an engineer. Back when I was in college, I worked at a very popular Chinese restaurant. They often put me at a cashier role, but decided I was better suited for a prep role for some reason or another. Let me start off by saying the manager absolutely hated me. He was a big dude with zero common sense, probably my bias, and just like the boss people around. On the day in question, he had me cutting tri-cut onions, which had to be measured perfectly. They had to be like 3 centimeters thick. As a studying engineer, once I had an eye for how big they needed to be, I was able to cut without measuring each one. Well, my manager did not like that at all. After about 30 minutes of cutting, he came back to see how I was doing and noticed I wasn't measuring each one. He threw a massive fit and told me I needed to measure them. I quickly explained that I could estimate really easily the size and that it was more efficient for me to not measure. He told me that wasn't possible, so I challenged him to a race. Cut 3 onions and each cut had to be perfect. He agreed and I of course beat him, since it took him an extra 5 seconds to measure each cut. Upon my victory, he pulls me into the back hallway to yell at me, saying that it doesn't matter if I'm faster, it's not good enough. It has to be done his way or I won't be there much longer. Cue malicious compliance. Being an engineer, I have a whole slew of measuring devices. Calipers, micrometers, rulers, you name it. So I brought all those in to work the next week on Onion Day. I'm literally sitting there cutting the onions and measuring each individual one with a new tool. One with a ruler, the next with my calipers, the next with a micrometer. So on and so forth until my manager comes back. "What the heck are you doing? You don't need to do that." He yells at me the moment he sees what I'm doing. "You told me to measure each cut. I wanted to be meticulous and make sure not to make a single mistake after you yelled at me last week." In a huff, he walks away to catch his breath and calls me into the hall later on. "Look, I don't care how you cut them anymore, just make sure they're correct." So I gave him a thumbs up and went back to cutting the onions like a normal person. Don't worry, I made sure all my random measurement tools were clean and sanitary before using them. So right here, this in my opinion is a bad example of management. So what there probably needs to be is some level of competency check on something like this, so there's definitely people who can just eye cut these things perfectly. You don't always have to measure each cut perfectly individually because it's just gonna slow things down. Unless this was like some very high level restaurant, it probably doesn't matter too much even if they're off just a little bit. And with that being said, that's all the stories we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Storytime channel, and if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the Storytime channel. And please leave any feedback you have in the comments below, as I'm always working to develop this craft of delivering these stories to you lovely people. Thank you all again for listening and watching the Storytime channel.